Thank you all for being here. I appreciate the commitment you obviously all demonstrate as you're responding to different needs that you've identified within the transition services that are being provided. And just to add a little context to that, every year I have a meeting with a roundtable of veterans from the 3rd District of Massachusetts. We have a great tradition of service, and just last week I was able to meet with them, and in the course of it I always do ask sort of how the programs that are out there are addressing their needs. We met in a university setting, so I was glad to hear that the GI Bill had made a real difference for many of those returning. A good number of them had taken advantage of it, were at the university and getting the degrees that they needed to go on. But one of the themes that I really heard was that transition assistance has to be more than a one-time event, and that it needs to be broad enough to enable veterans to make the most of all the different services that are out there. So whether they're medical, financial, educational, whatever it may be, that are open to them and their families. So even a GI Bill, for example, may not seem like the right thing when you're first getting out of the services, but as you ease into your new life, suddenly it looms larger as an opportunity. And as outreach programs do exist, as I said, you all are responding to needs that you've identified. I've found that veterans I've spoken to often are not fully aware of the range of programs or even the existence of the kinds of organizations that you represent and the benefits that are available to them. And again, what we heard, I think, from all of them and have heard over time is that the program has to reflect a long-term commitment. That they have to be responsive to them in a long-term setting, especially in the job market, in the era of seeking jobs, because that market is so dynamic. So we have an interest in developing entrepreneurs. That's a great thing, and I agree with you. The leadership skills that have been developed for those serving are remarkable, and there are many places for those skills to be exercised. And a mentoring program and an example set is always very good, but sometimes it may get a dream going in your head, but you still don't know how to follow on and realize it. So I'm curious with all of you, as in the job market context, we know all the other needs that are out there, in a very dynamic environment. How are you providing assistance or programs that reflect the dynamism of our time so that you're not outdated from day one as somebody is moving from thinking about one thing to another to another?
So those are all great comments. So I think what's really important is today, if they're not able to tell their story, and I'm going to let Mr. Mann, he's done phenomenal work with having soldiers tell their story, but the importance of working together as groups. So when we just go to a base, we spend a weekend with them, and we just don't leave. We give them scripts and tactics to use whether it's for salary negotiations or it's even a script to contact maybe a veteran that works in an organization that you may want to work with, and then use those scripts to get into that organization, because the days of sending out your resume just doesn't work. No one's reading resumes. Computers are reading resumes. Most jobs are found within an organization. So if you can network in and have scripts already tailored towards you and you can just kind of tweak them, I think is a very valuable tool. And so those are some of the tools. And then when we leave, we set up meetup groups so they can meet up as a group and take ownership of it and have organizers within there so that they can hold themselves accountable to making LinkedIn connections, to go to maybe different events in the community and to network. Very, very important.
And those follow-on activities would seem to be very important. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. I work with veterans at a very grassroots level from all services, spending a lot of time trying to get our head around what's challenging them as they come into transition and then going to speak on it. And what I've found is that most of our military warriors today, they absolutely love what they do for a living. In fact, it satisfies such a high calling for their inner purpose, and it's so in line with it, they almost don't even think about it. But what happens is when they separate from service, there's all this emphasis on getting a job and just stepping into civil society, and they kind of leave that inner purpose back in their team room, back in their platoon bay, back in their ready room, and they're not as aware as they could be and should be of what it is that really makes them tick, what brought them in the military, what was it that kept them in the military in those dark times when they lost buddies and friends. And when you leave that kind of purpose behind, even if you get a great job, and with the kind of caustic combat that they've seen in many cases, it makes transition very tough. So just one thing is getting familiar with each warrior's purpose well before they transition. That's a very important thing. The second thing is the ability to tell their story. We're hardwired as warriors not to talk about ourselves. We're hardwired to talk about our teammates and maybe a few other things, but for the most part, when they step into civil society, they're not telling their story. And folks like Mr. Randazzo and others, they want to hear their stories because it really has a massive impact, and it has huge healing powers on the kind of combat stress that many of these warriors have been through. So teaching them and empowering them to tell their own story is the second thing that we do at Mission America and that I work with Phil on. And then finally, we call it keeping the light on in the team room. Military warriors are some of the most collaborative, communicative people in the world. We can go into any rough spot and we can figure it out. We'll build a team around it and get it done. For some reason, when we walk into civil society, we don't do that. We don't stay connected to the team that we had, and we sure don't build new teams. So those are just three areas where we put a lot of emphasis to hopefully be position players for TAP and others to meet a need that if we don't address it, it's going to come calling at the end.
Thank you. I've run out of time. I'm sorry, Mr. Mahoney, I can't hear your answer. Thank you.
I think we'll have time for a second round, so stand by.
Again,
Mr. Knight?
so as veterans are seeking you all out for one reason or another, I'm curious what they're telling you about what has been most effective with regard to the transition services that they've been offered through the DOD, and where are their shortfalls? We could start with you, Mr. Mahoney.
I think, from my perspective, the transition classes on base are effective. You basically get what you put into those courses. If a service member goes there and is participating and they're anxious to learn and they're going to leave there and make progress with their future, that can be effective for them. It won't be effective for them if they're in the class and not paying attention and focused on other things. So we have seen that. It is frustrating that there are things that are available for them that can be effective, that in some cases they don't take advantage of. I think the courses on base also that are directed towards education and other specific areas, we refer them back to the base for those courses, and they can be effective as well.
Do you hear why there might be some who don't take advantage of it? Do you see a reason why some are more likely to do it and others not?
I would say, ma'am, there's a little bit of complacency. There might be overconfidence in how marketable their skills will be when they get out of the service. They may not have a realistic expectation of, say, their salary range or how long it will take and how much effort it's going to take to get employment.
Okay. Mr. Mann?
Just a little different twist to that. The folks that I talk to, they're sprinting all the way to the finish line. They still have dust on their boots, and they don't have a lot of time to really process the notion of transition. And so when they, it's a mindset, and it's more than just the TAP program. It's getting yourself ready for that. And so they in many cases, they're going into transition having just come off deployments, having just come off training missions. And what I hear often is just frustration that transition happened so quickly and there just wasn't time to prepare. And then they find themselves, in a brand new world trying to figure it out.
So it's more a timing issue.
Operational tempo and timing, I think.
Okay. Mr. Randazzo?
I would add, I think it's also a delivery issue. I understand. I've not sat through a class. I've finally been invited to sit through a class. I'm going to sit through one at Fort Bragg. But I understand there's hundreds of PowerPoints throughout a 5-day period, and a 26-year-old soldier who might be transitioning out, a Marine, that might not be engaging to them. So I think more interaction, I think more technology tools. And the manuals they receive, it's 15 pounds of manuals. I'm not sure if printing those are super effective. I think you can provide those digitally, but I think there needs to be more engagement. The one thing I've heard is that the people who deliver this, they're rushing through slides, and I've heard from about a dozen people who are going through it right now. It's, hey, let's get through these last 43 slides, and let's work through lunch, and we'll get you guys out of here by 2:30. And so I don't think that's the message that soldiers need to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield back.
Thanks. Mr. Knight, follow up?
Sure.